we're here today in the unceded Letwin Nation territory, which is part of the larger St'át'imc territory. And the Litwa territory is one of the biggest First Nation territory in BC. It stretches all the way towards Whistler, and then up towards the Pemberton Valley, up toward Mount Meager, and then down towards Douglas. Flint knapping is the ancient art or technique of making tools out of stone. It's one of the oldest tool making types, I guess. Without it, humans would have never been able to survive. It's one of the oldest art forms, I would argue.
Very cool. How did you get started in it?
I got started in it around the same time I started the bow making, so around 8.5 years ago, and just out of curiosity. And then after I started it, I just kind of got hooked on it and just never stopped.
What was the significance of these tools? Do you mind showing us an example? What were the significance of these tools, and how did they impact Lil'wat community way of life, or St'át'imc way of life?
Yeah, so flint knapping, just like the bow making, was very important. If a man didn't know how to flint knap, he wouldn't have been able to make his own tools. He wouldn't have been able to do any of the butchering or tool making, because the thing with flint knapping is, before you can make a bow, you have to know how to flint knap, because if you can't flint knap, then you can't make the tools to make the bow. So basically, the whole process of making your own hunting kit starts off with the flint knapping. So you got to make your own tools, and then you're gonna, go out in the bush to cut a tree down to make your bow, and then you're gonna flint knap another tool to plane all that wood down. So everything starts off with the flint knapping. So traditionally in Lil'wat and St'át'imc territory, we would traditionally use what was called basalt. It's just this jet black stone. It's volcanic. It's not obsidian, but it is volcanic. And I get my basalt from a ancient quarry that most people know as the Arrowstone Hills, which is up towards Cache Creek and Kamloops there. And that was an ancient quarry that mostly the Shuswap people went to, but people here in Lil'wat would often receive this kind of stone through trade. Our traditional quarry was most likely up towards Mount Meager, which is the massive volcano up there, which is obviously where you would most likely get volcanic materials. Other materials would be agate or jasper, but those materials would have most likely been received through trade. We would also have obsidian, but we didn't have any obsidian around here. Like the other stuff, we would receive that through trade with the Squamish people. Like they would get their obsidian from Mount Garibaldi. Other obsidian would have came from up north, like in Anaheim Lake area where the Chilcotin people lived. Most of the obsidian though would have just, again, been received through trade. We wouldn't have actually physically went to the areas, because like I said, with Anaheim Lake area, that was Chilcotin territory, and Chilcotins were our traditional enemies, so there was really no way that we would have physically went over there to gather the material ourselves. Another cool thing with the obsidian is, I'm not really sure how it works, but they're able to analyze something with the obsidian where they're able to tell what the source of the obsidian was, so where it came from. So with our recent archaeological dig that we had this summer, we did find some obsidian chips and flakes. We didn't find any full-on obsidian artifacts like these arrowheads or spear points, but we did find little bits of it. So the plan is to analyze those to see where they came from, and then from that we can really see the extent of the trade. Yeah.
I can help with that, being a science teacher. Being a past science teacher, every stone, wherever it was formed, it shares a similar composition atom-wise to all the other rock that it's with. So if we can find the location that the rock was made in, or if we have an idea, and then we can kind of look at the rock and see its composition on an atomic level, then they'll actually match. So every stone from a different quarry, quote unquote, could be able to be matched with a reasonable amount of, security that it is there, just based on kind of the composition
Yeah.
on the atomic level.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as the rock gets older, or where it gets harder and harder, it's a pretty cool way for archaeologists to kind of track who was trading with who
Yeah.
and why, and then we can kind of start figuring out what was exactly traded, because it wasn't just
Yeah.
arrowhead for arrowhead. There
Yeah.
was probably other materials and other things that were moved around.
Yeah. Yeah. So usually you'll start off with what's called a nodule. So with this basalt stuff, when we're out in the quarry, we're actually looking in the creek beds for these little nodules or cobbles. So oftentimes they're going to start off pretty round, and what we have to do is we actually have to split those cobbles open. And if you're going to be making these larger implements like these knife blades or spear points, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find an elongated cobble, and then we're going to split that so we get two pieces. And then those two pieces are already semi-flat and already in the basic shape. And then from there we're going to be using what's called percussion. So we're going to be taking a large piece of antler or a stone cobble. These are the tools we would use for percussion. Usually we would use heavy deer antler or moose antler, preferably moose antler because you can get them a lot bigger and a lot heavier. This one's made out of a mule deer antler. More modern knappers will use these copper boppers.
Oh, cool.
I like to use that a lot. The metal copper tools do make flint knapping a lot easier, I think. Less chance of breakage, I personally think, but I still do use these antler tools just for the nostalgia. So basically what you're going to do is you would have a pad of leather or maybe a piece of bark, and then you would have your split nodule or cobble, and you're basically going to be taking these bigger flakes off of it, and what that's doing is you're trying to thin that piece down so that it's more easier to shape. And after you do that, you're going to be using what's called pressure flaking, and from there you're going to be using these antler tines, and you'll have a pad of leather on your hand, and then you'll have your work piece, and you're basically just going to be, instead of hitting flakes off, you're pressing flakes off. So you're using pressure, which is why it's called pressure flaking.
You said, the flint knapping and the bow making started with curiosity, but now that you're 8 years down the road doing this stuff, how do you feel about, when you're building these things and then seeing it go from a piece of stone all the way to an arrow that you're using to shoot? Does it impact you in a certain way?
I mean, obviously it feels really cool to do something that was being done in the past and to do it successfully, and to know that these can take animals, and to at least I've been trying to take an animal with it. I haven't done it yet, but I'll keep trying. I'll do it one day.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, when I do take an animal with my own gear, it's going to be a special feeling. I can already tell, because
I bet.
no one has ever done this with their own handmade bows and arrows, like handmade Liltwet style bows and arrows, arrowheads and arrows. So when I do it, I'll probably be the first person to do it within a couple 100 years.
Yeah.
I think it's an art form. I
would agree.
It's the same thing with the basket making. You have basket makers all over Mount Currie now, so I think it's important to keep the basket making alive. So I think it's also important to keep the traditional bow making alive, because this was practically gone when I started.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have any surviving original examples of traditional bows. So I had to start from scratch. It was just from words in a book that I had to take and apply what I read to what I already knew. So I had to use the basic bow making and what I read, and had to put all that together. I think it's good just to keep it going, because once it's gone, and no one else is wanting to pick it up, it'll just disappear. It'll be gone. So I think it's really important to keep it going. I also think it's really important, especially for today. A lot of archaeologists are finding these things, but not knowing how it actually works. I mean, they might know how some of it works, but something I found is you have archaeologists who know a lot of things, and then you'll have you know, the most random person living on Vancouver Island who is an expert flint knapper and who knows
Right.
more than the archaeologist. So I think it's really good to
Have both.
have both, right? So
Right.
which is why I'm doing the archaeology and the flint knapping, so that I'm able to understand both worlds.
Well, I'm glad there's someone here on the Lil'wat territory
Yeah.
revitalizing and bringing it back, and
Yeah.
I don't think you'll be the last one.
Yeah, I really hope not.
Thanks again for chatting with us, Dal.
Yeah.